Hi, I'm the Warrior Witch, and you can call me Nike. If you're new to this channel, I make content based around witchcraft, pagan religion, and the occasional other spiritual adjacent thing like astrology. If you like what I do, stick around, subscribe, I'm pretty cool. Today I wanted to talk about something that is sometimes overlooked broadly. I'm not entirely sure why, but I figured I would talk about it because I like detail. And that would be the actual specifics of a realistic look at what it's like to work with pagan gods. When we come into pagan religion, and it is in fact a religion, I know that it's kind of weird to say that. We're used to religion referring to more of the mainstream religions, but pagan religion, the details are a little bit more hazy because a lot of what we have to do is reconstruction, which is exactly what it sounds like. We have to reconstruct from the bits and pieces we have from history. So any mythology we may still have lying around, if it is even in its original form, we have to work with these bits and pieces, and so we don't have as much of a structured system. So we don't really have a body of work to reference to look at what exactly you're supposed to do or not supposed to do. And we can start with that point. Is there one particular way to do deity work? And the answer is yes and no. There are reference points that we can follow. We do have some historical sources for some gods and how they were worked with, but on the whole, generally, not really. You see, there are many gods, aside from the ones that we would consider main ones, like Odin and Freya and Thor, and Persephone and Hades and Zeus and Hera. You've got these smaller gods that don't have as much mythology about them, they don't have as much written about them, and we don't have as many records in general about what to do with them. Even with these larger ones, we don't have quite as much, and we have to sort of work around it and either work with what we've got, or more mainly, work with what is called UPG, Unverified Personal Gnosis. So with that in mind, you have to remember that a lot of this is going to be based around personal practice, and so what I may or may not do, what I may or may not experience, does not mean that your experiences with that same god, if they are very different, are wrong. Neither of us is wrong for working with them differently. My friend Anthony and I have both discussed our work with Hecate, who is a Greek goddess, and our experiences with her look very different. His relationship with her is much more consistent and constant. It's more of an everyday, all the time kind of presence. Whereas for me, it was more of whenever I specifically contacted her or when she really wanted something from me and wanted to get my attention directly. It was not an all the time, everyday thing. Now, I was not wrong for it not being constant, and Anthony was not wrong for it being constant. We just worked with her very differently, and that's a big part of it. Now, there are also other experiences that are called SPG, or Shared Personal Gnosis, where we can have many similar themes that come up a lot. So in my work with Freya, I often hear that she's a little bit of a, shall we say, tough love goddess, where the lessons she teaches you are sort of trial by fire. She'll put you in these really difficult situations, and it's not very much like a soft, gentle, motherly, Cancerian kind of energy. It's a little bit harsher than that in a good way. She's not mean. But if you ask her for wisdom, for example, I asked her to bring me some wisdom in a martial combat tournament, instead of it being what I meant, and I didn't specify, and that's my fault, what I meant was I wanted her to bring me wisdom in the form of being able to predict my enemy's movements, to be able to keep my head cool, to be able to navigate the fights and be in flow and not have to worry so much. What she meant and brought me through that wisdom was having 3 very difficult fights in a row with people that she knew were going to challenge me in a very particular way, and sort of the trial by fire was putting me in situations that she knew would likely upset me, and I had to push through, try to win, and keep my head all at the same time with people that made me particularly upset to have to be around, to put it lightly. And it does teach you wisdom. Teaches you wisdom the hard way. It's far less fun to have to go through things the hard way, but it does teach you. It is the teaching through experience versus giving you things nice and easy. An easy tournament doesn't really teach me anything. But we'll get to the personal experiences later. I want to first start with what it actually physically looks like to work with a deity. And of course, once again, this is going to differ for everybody. So all I can say is that this is for my personal practice, and if my practice looks different from yours, that's okay. Our practices are likely not going to look exactly the same. There's going to be so many elements that are going to be completely different. So just keep that in mind. My practice is mine, your practice is yours. And the other thing I'll say is that I'm not going to be sharing every detail of every experience I've ever had, because for me, that is extremely personal. Religion is extremely personal for a lot of people, especially pagans, because it ends up being, in a way, a much more intimate relationship than we're used to hearing in mainstream Christianity. The one-on-one sort of relationships that develop, this direct working relationship in many ways, ends up being something that a lot of people do not feel comfortable sharing. So if you want to discuss these things with the community, which I highly encourage you to, just keep in mind that not everybody's going to want to talk about it. So if you find a practitioner that, say, works with a god that you're interested in, or that you currently work with and you want to share your experiences, just remember that if they're not willing to talk about it, that's also okay. Because some people feel very judged, some people don't feel comfortable talking about it. It's such an intimate thing that it feels kind of awkward and invasive in many ways to be asking about these experiences. So if somebody does not want to share, please just respect that they don't want to share, and that's all there is to it. It's nothing personal to you. It's not about you. It is about them wanting to have this private moment kept private. That said, let's get into it. We kind of expect deity work to be this big ritualistic thing because of how it's portrayed in media. You know, you see the big circles and the invocation pentagrams and the big fancy words and the chants, and it's like a whole to-do. And in reality, most people's deity work does not look like that at all. For me, my deity work often looks like lighting their candles when I wake up in the morning or before I'm going to do something that maybe reminds me of them. And often that's kind of it, to be honest. My every single day kind of look is really just that. The core of it ends up looking like lighting their candles, maybe sitting at the altar for 5 minutes and praying, lighting some incense, and then I get on with my day. It's very short. It's not a very elaborate setup, if you know what I mean. Now, granted, there are other times where it is much more elaborate, where it's a whole ritual and you're writing these specific prayers and asking them to be with you or to bring you this or that. And it can be this very in-between thing where it sort of merges and flows between work and worship as two different concepts. But the rituals are not a common thing. Some deities have more of a schedule. So Hecate has a once a month typical new moon thing. And so for many people who worship her and work with her, the new moon is much more of that ritualistic time, or even sometimes the full moon, depending on their practice. But it's not always like that. For some, it's just a very daily thing. And for some, the rituals come in more when you're trying to work on a particular aspect. So if you want to take a special night to dedicate to just that god versus all of them, or if you want to do something to honor all of them and you bring offerings for each one, you know, it's really just going to differ depending on your needs. Now let's talk about offerings. I've spoken about it here and there across different videos, but offerings are another thing that do not typically look the way you might think. Our media mind sort of goes to like animal sacrifice and it's a whole ritual and you're doing the whole invocation. You can do that. That is a thing that is out there. Just general offerings being more of a ritual. But my more typical offerings are much smaller than that. They're a lot more mundane than you might expect. My typical offerings are very easy. Time is a big one. Incense is one. Incense of their particular herbs that are associated with them most of the time. And food and drink. Water is a big one. It's very easy. Basically anybody can do it. If you're under 21, you don't have to worry about purchasing alcohol to give them because certain gods are associated with alcohol, like wine and mead. So water's an easy one. Get it right from the tap, nice and fresh, and you set it out just for them. A thing that I like to do a lot is I will get 2 cups. I'll put out 1 cup for an offering of water for them, and I'll have my cup of water, and I'll sort of have a drink with them. Now, of course, I don't think that they're literally picking up that cup and drinking it, but for me, it's taking that time, again, time as another offering, and sharing that moment with them, and continuing to nourish my body to be able to worship and work with them. Food's another tricky one I've mentioned before. It kind of varies on tradition, but food I often leave out, and that's just a very simple offering. Set it, say this is for you, then you keep going, you move on with your day. I tend to keep an eye on it because I have cats and the cats like to eat the offerings, so I try not to let them get into it too much, but typically, you just leave it out for a few hours and you're good to go. I will sometimes bury mine, or if it's something that's a little less intrusive into the environment, I'll just leave it out by a tree, and that's the end of it. Water, the same thing. You can dump it down the sink, you can pour it on your plants, you can pour it on a tree. Whole lots of options. Now let's talk about communicating with the gods. This is where people really want to know the details, and Unfortunately, I kind of can't give the details because this is really where it's going to vary from person to person based on which of their senses is the strongest when it comes to the various clairs, when it comes to the specific god, because different gods speak differently, how their gods speak to them in particular, what practice you're in. Different traditions have these gods speak to you in different ways. I can give my experiences, but again, remember, this is going to vary from person to person. You know, I'm a little bit what I call spirit deaf, so I don't really like hear the words or the thoughts or phrases or whatever. I don't like hear words necessarily, but it's, for me, a lot more of smells. A particular smell from nowhere with no traceable origin in the room will just be in the room, and I've tried to chase it, I've tried to follow it down. There's just no origin to it. There's just a smell that appears that is related to them. And that's as best as I can say it. It's not like a specific scent for me. Like, I can't say, that's the scent of a rose, it must be Aphrodite. It's more of this scent combination, this unique scent, is their scent. Some of it's also shadows out of the corner of your eye. It's not like you'll look and see a physical entity standing in front of you like you'd think of in the movies, but it's more of, you see movement like over here, you know, out in this little periphery. And you can turn your head and look to see if anybody's there, but typically nobody's gonna be there because nobody's there. But it's the sensation that there is a person here or there is an entity here. You can sort of feel as if somebody has walked into the room. You know, you can sometimes feel somebody's walked into the room and you turn to greet them without ever actually seeing them physically with your eyes. There's just something that alerts you that they're there. It's the same thing with spirits for me, where it's more of something's here and I don't even have to be looking to know. Or it's that the vibe of the room will change. So it might feel like there is a shift in the air, like a tension's come around suddenly, or like you've gotten home and you've just closed the door and you've been able to calm down, like the air around you changes. So that's another big one to pay attention to. So don't think that if you're seeing people talk about, I heard my deity say this and we had this whole conversation, typically that's just a simplified way of explaining it versus having to say, well, there was a scent in the room and I felt like there was somebody had just entered, and you know, all these things put together. It's easier to just say, I had this experience with them, whatever. There's also divination. So when we get into divination, this is where it really will vary. I have different methods of divination for different deities. When I worked with the Greek pantheon more heavily, I did a lot more tarot and that kind of divination. It just made more sense for me to work with them in that way. There are plenty of other ways that you can work with them if you like to scry especially. Scrying is a big one, but scrying is a lot more difficult for me, so I go with your more stereotypical forms like tarot. But with the Norse gods in particular, I go for runes. I have two different rune sets that I use. I have the Elder Futhark and the Anglo-Saxon Futhork. They are two different alphabets with slightly different meanings to some of the runes. They are related. It's a whole thing. I'm not really going to get into it. But I have those two rune sets that I use. I made both of them myself, and I just use them depending on the mood that I'm in. So if I want to maybe ask for a message from them, or I want to know what things that they are expecting of me, or if I want their insight into a situation and I'm asking for their help with it, I might light their candle, light some incense. I typically ask the question out loud. I will say it out into the room. But you don't necessarily have to do that. That's just my preference because I'm in a space where I'm able to do so. You could also write it down. That's all up to preference. And then I'll do the rune cast. I don't typically do the tarot card spread method where you pick one at a time and you lay them in a particular pattern. I usually will ask the question. I'll take the bag that I have them stored in and mix them all up. And I'll reach my hand in and take a fistful and I'll gently toss them in front of me so that they'll scatter a little bit. And their relation to each other, how close they are to each other, to me, how far off they are. I kind of envision it like in a circle. So if they're further out on the edges, think of it more like tasseomancy, where they're sort of mixed up in that way. Things that are on the edges versus on the inside circle is going to be a little bit different. It takes a while to get used to that method, and I definitely recommend writing it down the first couple times you do it and seeing how those things come to pass to get a better understanding of that relationship. But that's besides the point. So I use the runes, that's the runecast method I do, and then I will write it out. I will draw exactly how they were aligned. I'll write if any were flipped over or face up. There's no real reversals with runes, so you don't have to pay attention to that, thankfully. And then I'll write their meanings and my interpretation of it. Hello, sir. Can I help you? No, don't go sniffing in there. Come here. Come here. Come here, boy. Come here. Oh. Hello, sir. Yes, you're here with me now. One of the other ways that you can look for signs and speaking to a god, and it's less of speaking directly as in a conversation and more of getting a sign from them, is animals. And this can vary wildly. So if there is a typical animal associated with them, like cats for Freya, or eagles, or hawks, or sometimes wild animals like foxes and wolves, depending on where you are. Go. Jump. Good boy. Now, wild animals are a little bit unpredictable, and I would caution against seeing just one and taking it as a sign. You kind of have to look for animals acting oddly or appearing in certain numbers. People typically go for 3s because they're a little bit easier to just keep track of in your mind. But, for example, if I was trying to speak to Odin and I wanted a sign from him, there's crows in my area, they just live here, so seeing a crow out in the yard after asking a question does not necessarily mean anything. Now, if I saw 2 crows sitting on the hood of my car, they never sit on my car, they don't touch any of the vehicles because they're prone to moving, they don't really like to get so close to the people, they're more about in the grass. If they were sitting on my car, that would be odd. And if they did it again later, like if they left and came back, I might take it then, as confirmation, because they're acting oddly and they're coming in a specific number that is associated with that god. Odin is associated with 2 specific crows, Hugin and Munin, which are, oh boy, memory, is it thought and memory? So with him in particular, there's like a set number that comes with him. Hecate is associated with 3s because she's associated with the 3-way crossroad. So 3 animals associated with her, or particular animals associated with her. So like black dogs are associated with her. So if you saw one as a sign where normally you live in an area where there's no dogs, that could maybe be an association of hers that you could take as a sign. The other way, which is very difficult to interpret sometimes, is dreams. If you are somebody who has a lot of dreams and they're often very vibrant, I won't say vivid because vivid dreams has a specific meaning, but vibrant dreams where there's a lot going on, there's action and speech involved, sometimes the gods can speak to us through those. For me, the gods appearing through dreams is pretty rare, but it has happened a time or two, and I do feel comfortable enough to share those with you. So there was a short while where I was working with Zeus, but I didn't really want to have a super involved relationship with him at the time, so it was more of I acknowledge that I've seen your signs around, I acknowledge that you're an important part of this pantheon, but I don't know that I really want to get heavy into working with you. So he sent me a symbol or 2, but one in particular was a dream where most of the time, the people that appear in my dreams, they do not give me names, and they don't really interact with me in a way that is notable. Like they're around and we might talk, but it's not like this is really important. Dreams that involve deities for me, and when I know there's a sign from them, they just feel different, and it's kind of hard to describe, but there's just a different feeling that comes with them, where you wake up and you're like, that was important, just immediately. So in this dream, I had a guy come up to me. He had long white hair, and he looked me in the face, and I asked his name, and he said, "My name is Zeus," and he gave me this like sly little smile. And when I woke up, I was like, he's just acknowledging that he is around. He didn't try to ask for anything. He didn't try to do anything. He was just like, "My name is Zeus." That was it. That was the whole conversation. So for me, that was a confirmation of, I'm here, I'm not pushing you, not asking anything of you, but I do want you to know that I'm here. There are other ones that are dream adjacent. I'll say there was one day where I was sleeping soundly, there was no storm really happening, and I grew up in Florida. I'm around plenty of storms, I was around plenty of lightning. I have never in my life had lightning strike this close to me. But I was woken from a dead sleep by a crack of lightning that was so loud I thought my ears were gonna split. Just crack of lightning, must have been near the parking lot of my apartment complex. Like, no way it was less than a quarter of a mile from me, maybe even less. I cannot describe how loud this was. And I posted that to Twitter. And Matt Oren, who does work with Kate, but did not know that I worked with her, said that he had just had a dream, maybe a single night ago, involving me and 2 other practitioners that only one of which he knew worked with Hecate, the other one and myself he did not know. All 3 of us do in fact work with her. He posted that was how she had appeared to us in a dream. We were all there with him and she would appear with a crack of lightning, and him seeing that post of mine, he was like, I don't know if you work with her, but I had this dream involving you and lightning. And so for me, that was the confirmation. It was confirmation through another person who had no idea that I even had this relationship with her. All he saw was lightning struck, remembered his dream, and that was confirmation for both of us that that was a significant moment. So more rarely, I would say, but sometimes there is confirmation through other people. But that confirmation is SPG. She is associated now in my head forever with lightning, appearing like a crack of lightning. And Freya, quite similarly, is always going to be that tough love kind of person. She has a jawbone that I got from my dear friend Frankie. They stopped working with her and gave me all of the, I'll call it memorabilia, I suppose, all of the bits and bobs that were associated with her. So I got a lot of those things from Frankie, and I now have some UPG in particular that this jawbone necklace, whenever I wear it, I get the really intense trials by fire. I brought that necklace with me to the tournament. I didn't wear it because it would have been dangerous, but I had it in my purse and I like held it, and when I was between rounds, I would put it on. And other times that I don't really want to get into, but any other time that I've worn it, things have just gotten very intense. And I don't necessarily mean like intense ritual, but I mean that the situations that I asked for help in became very intensified in a way that were stressful, but not so much stress that I couldn't handle it, more just stressful like I don't want to be here right now. And it teaches me lessons the hard way, as always. And so I've learned, if I'm not in a good place for that kind of stress in my life at that particular moment, don't put on the necklace, even for one moment. There was one day I put it on for 1 second, thought, this is probably a mistake, took it off, too late, didn't matter, I was already long gone. And that's UPG for myself. I don't know about anybody else's experiences with her in that way, any jewelry associated with her and putting that on. Yeah, that's my fault. That's my mistake. That's my mistake that I know now very much not to repeat. You don't put it on unless you are sure that you're ready for trial by fire that day. And most of my experiences kind of go that way, where it's little things with small confirmations that look very mundane, but the message behind them and the repetition behind them and being able to confirm it time and again by repeating, we could call them experiments. You know, I could experiment with putting on the jawbone necklace, and every time I've done it, it gets repeated and confirmed. So you can do your own confirmations like I have. You can get confirmations through other people on accident and make it SPG. You can get confirmation through animal messengers or other symbols appearing in certain groups if they are non-organic kind of symbols, if you know what I mean, like a particular object associated with them, like a torch is associated with Hecate or keys. So if you saw a lot of these old keys or torches, you might see that as a sign. So repetition is really big, but the particular day-to-day is often much more boring than you might expect it to be. So if your practice does not feel extravagant and this movie magic kind of feeling, it's because most of the time it's not. Now granted, some of the experiences, like the crack of lightning, are very extreme and feel a little bit more fantastical like that, but most of the time, 99% of the time, my interactions with deities are through divination or through these confirmations that are very little things that maybe feel a little bit mundane to other people. I would highly encourage anybody who's had any experiences that they feel comfortable sharing to share them in the comments. I would love to have a discussion about the ways that it looks for you and being able to compare and contrast that with other people in the comments. I also have a Discord server where you could do exactly that. So we could discuss this whole how deities speak to you thing in my Discord server, and we can have a great time. So if you feel comfortable sharing those things, I encourage you to do so. I think it's wonderful to see the diversity in everybody's practices and to be able to get a better feel for the pagan community as a whole and how we interact with the divine. If you're not following me already on all my social media platforms, you should do it. I post on Instagram. I'm pretty cool there. I take my own photos. I write articles on my blog. I get a little bit wild on Maine on Twitter. That's a little bit more of my fun platform. And, you know, I'm all over the place. I've got my links and such, so you should go follow me. If you're not already subscribed here, what are you doing? I'm also part of a podcast called Magnolias Magic. That's a very fun one with my two co-hosts, Dot Darling and Anthony Wolfe, and they are both lovely people and I enjoy them very much, and we get to have some really awesome conversations there and on that Discord server. So follow me everywhere so you don't get to miss out on all the fun. Otherwise, that's all I've got for you guys this week. So I'll see you next time, and blessed be.